Let's dive into one of the most intense showdowns in ancient history. It's a battle of wills between a man who thinks he's a god and the god of the universe. And the breaking point? Well, it comes from a place so small, so completely unexpected, you almost won't believe it.
You know this quote from the preacher Charles Spurgeon? It just nails it. The power we're talking about here isn't just about some big, flashy show of force. No, it's about having total control. It can be terrifying, sure, like a lion, but it can also be something tiny and maddening, like lice. And our story today is all about that incredible contrast.
So that brings us to the big question, right? Of all the things that could have happened, why gnats? How did this plague of tiny insects become the moment that changed everything? Let's get into it.
All right, so to really get why the third plague was such a big deal, we actually have to back up a bit to the second one. Because Pharaoh, the ruler of Egypt, a man who saw himself as a living god, had already been hit with something really strange and, frankly, humiliating, a plague of frogs.
Now, this wasn't just a little problem, it was a psychological nightmare. I mean, can you even imagine? Hordes of frogs everywhere. You can't sleep because they're in your bed. You can't eat because they're in your ovens, in your food. For a king, this is beyond embarrassing. And to make it even worse, frogs were actually sacred symbols of an Egyptian goddess. So the very thing they worshipped was now tormenting them. It was a complete mockery.
So this all-powerful king, this god king, is brought to his knees, not by an army, but by amphibians. He actually calls for Moses and Aaron, the two guys he absolutely can't stand. The frogs had, as one writer put it, taught him good manners. He was finally desperate enough to ask for help from his enemies.
And this is where things get really interesting, because we start to see a pattern emerge with Pharaoh. He makes a promise when he's in trouble, but what happens the second the pressure's off?
This is a huge moment. It's the first time Pharaoh seems to give in. He asks Moses and Aaron to pray for him, and he promises to let their people go. I mean, it really looks like a breakthrough. It seems like he's finally admitting there's a power out there that's bigger than he is.
But, and this is a huge but, there's a catch. His prayer was all about him. It was completely selfish. Think about it. He didn't say, "I've sinned, forgive me." He just said, "Get rid of this problem." He wanted the pain to stop, but he had no intention of changing the behavior that caused it.
And you can probably guess what happens next, right? The moment he got what he wanted, the second there was respite, a little breathing room, that promise just vanished into thin air. He hardened his heart and took back his word. This whole scene sets the stage perfectly for what's about to happen, because the next plague is going to be totally different.
Okay, so now we get to the main event, the third plague, and this one is a complete game changer. It feels like it was specifically designed to stop Pharaoh's little cycle of fake promises.
And the differences here are just huge. The first two plagues, they came with a warning. This third one? Nope, it was a sudden strike, a punishment for that broken promise. The first two came from the Nile River, this one came from the dust of the land itself. But here's the most important part. Pharaoh's magicians could copy the first two plagues. This time they hit a brick wall.
So, why the dust? That seems kind of random, right? Well, it wasn't random at all. This was a direct shot at their religion. See, the Egyptians worshipped the land itself. They had gods like Geb, the earth god, and Set, the god of the desert. So turning that sacred ground into the source of their misery, that was an attack on the very foundation of their beliefs.
And the plague itself, oh, it was nasty. We're talking about tiny, biting gnats or lice. They were inescapable, covering everyone and everything. People, animals, you name it. Now you have to remember, the Egyptians were obsessed with being clean and ritually pure. For their priests, who had to be totally free of any vermin to even enter a temple, this wasn't just annoying, it was a defilement. It literally made it impossible for them to do their jobs.
And this brings us to the absolute climax. Pharaoh's own spiritual experts, the guys who had been matching Moses move for move up to this point, are now staring down something totally new.
So, the stage is set. The magicians step up. They're feeling pretty confident. They've turned staffs into snakes, water into blood. They summon their own frogs. So they start their chants, their secret rituals, getting ready to whip up a batch of gnats and prove they're still in the game.
And for the very first time, nothing. It just doesn't work. The power they've always relied on is suddenly gone. The dust is just dust.
And in that moment of total failure, they turn to Pharaoh and say these incredible words, "This is the finger of God." It's a shocking confession of defeat, coming from the king's most trusted advisors.
So what on earth did they mean by that, the finger of God? They weren't just saying, hey, this is a stronger magic. No, they were admitting this was a totally different kind of power. See, their magic was all about imitation, about manipulating things that already existed. This power was creative. It was making life out of lifeless dust. It was a direct act of creation, and they knew, deep down, they couldn't copy that or fight against it.
And the fallout from this? It was catastrophic for Pharaoh's entire system. In one single moment, all of Egypt's spiritual authority, their magic, their priests, their gods, was exposed as a cheap copy. All of it was shown to be completely powerless against the real thing.
Now, you'd think, okay, game over, right? His own experts just tapped out. But this is where the story takes its most unbelievable and, honestly, most troubling turn.
Remember that cycle we talked about? It starts with suffering from a plague. That leads to bargaining and making promises. The bargaining gets him a little respite. And that relief, instead of making him grateful, leads right back to him hardening his heart and defying God all over again. The third plague was supposed to break that cycle with undeniable proof. But it didn't.
It's just incredible. Even after his own magicians told him to his face, "We can't do this. This is God," Pharaoh's heart only got harder. He was given the clearest evidence possible, evidence confirmed by his own team, and he chose to double down on his defiance.
And that leaves us with this final, really powerful question. The magicians saw the finger of God, and they bowed to a reality they knew they couldn't deny. Pharaoh saw the exact same thing, and he refused to bow. It's a fascinating look at pride and power, and it forces us to ask ourselves, when we're faced with a truth we can't deny, what is it that makes one person finally yield, while another person just digs in their heels and resists?